How's everybody doing? Well, something unfortunate happened recently, and it got me thinking, and it made me take heat a little more seriously. Now, we've always kind of taken it seriously. We're in upstate New York. It gets cold here, but we had that cold spell. This is 2023. It's February right now, whatever it was, a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago or so. Northeast had a crazy, crazy cold spell. I think the coldest temperature ever recorded was recorded in New Hampshire. It was like negative 100 and something Fahrenheit. We're not talking about Celsius here. We're talking about Fahrenheit. And we got down to about negative 10, and with the wind chill, it was negative 26. So it was, if you can see the difference there, that means the wind was blowing like crazy, and that can really make a house cold. It blows right in through those cracks, and we have an old house. But what made it even worse is that the oil burner went out. So the oil burner went out, negative 26 wind chill. We got a 2-year-old, and he was sick. I mean, I don't really think you could get a worse combination. That is probably about the worst combination. I guess it would be worse if it was negative 27, but it was pretty bad, and it went out. I woke up at 2 in the morning, and I looked at the thermostat, and it said 55, and I was like, what's happening here? And this happens. I think it might have happened last year and the year before, and we call somebody up, and they come over and they clean it, and it works for the year, and next year it happens. But it didn't happen in a situation like this. This is the worst possible situation. It's happened during the day. It's happened, and this was a Sunday, if I remember correctly, right? I think it was a Sunday, or it was a Saturday night. So that's the worst that could happen, and it exposed a major hole in my knowledge. I don't know anything about oil burners. I don't. Now we got the house 6 years ago. We're closing in on 7 years now. It'll be 7 years in June. And before this, we were in Manhattan. We didn't have to worry about oil burners in Manhattan. I don't know anything about them. But after this incident, I went on a journey to try and figure out oil burners. I wanted to get this thing running myself. And wow. It took a long time. I thought I had it fixed 3 different times. 3 different times I thought I had it fixed. Finally, on the 4th one, it's been running now a week and a few days, so it's pretty much a guarantee that it's fixed. And I wanted to give you a few tips on how to possibly get your oil burner up and running if you're in an emergency situation. If I have this situation happen again, where we're in the middle of the night and it's freezing cold and the oil burner goes out, I believe that I can get it going again. Now, I should a few things before I get started. One is that I am not an oil burner expert, and oil burners. Yeah, I mean, it's fire. This is fire. I mean, it's diesel fuel. So that's one thing, is that it's an oil burner, but it doesn't burn oil, it burns diesel. And that's some things that that's something that some people don't realize, is that the fuel that your oil burner uses is diesel fuel. It just happens to have a dye in it that makes it not look like diesel from the pump. Why? It's for tax purposes. It's a different type of fuel. So it's not going to be as costly as the one at the pump, because the one at the pump has a tax associated with it. Whether it's the county or the state, they put a tax on it. Even the town maybe even has a tax, gets tax money from it. So it's different, but it is diesel. It's not gasoline, okay? But it is still flammable. The flash point is higher than gasoline, but it is still dangerous, so you need to be careful. But oil burners, let me sign off my phone. Oil burners, they are not complicated. This is what I figured out at the end. Once I figured out how to fix this oil burner, I really had to learn everything there was to know about an oil burner, and there isn't much to it. In fact, it's kind of like a pellet stove. It really kind of is. It has a few different things that can go wrong with it, And if you know what those things are, you should be in good shape. Now, if you have a really old oil burner, this is the next thing I wanted to talk about. This might not solve your problem. It might not solve your problem because an old oil burner, it could just be its time and it needs actual parts replaced, not maintenance. I would call what I did maintenance. I didn't replace anything that is, I guess we'd say mechanical, right? The pump, right? The pump that actually pulls the diesel through, and I did not replace that. I would call that mechanical. What I did was maintenance. And there's 4 big things that you need to check. So let's get started. Now, the 4 big things, I'm just going to list them all right away. First thing is that you have what's commonly called the nozzle. Okay, this is what I think most people know, is the nozzle. It's the piece that sprays the diesel. Okay? I'm going to talk more in depth at the end about the nozzle, but that's the first thing that can have a problem. It can get clogged up. It can get clogged up, and the best thing to do is replace it. Usually it's located the closest to the actual burner that you're going to get. You're going to have a box probably that's covered by something. If you unscrew that, you take it off, you're going to see a pump, you're going to see maybe some wires, some electronics, and it's all going to point to the actual oil burner, which is a very big box. It might be 4 feet tall, it might be 3 feet deep, 2 feet wide, something like that. You're going to see a pipe, probably a black pipe that goes to it. Inside that pipe is the nozzle. Now, why is that? Because the nozzle is spraying the diesel and the contacts that light it up, the spark, is right there. So the fire needs to be directed into the boiler part of this. And that's what happens. The fire goes into the boiler and it heats pipes. In those pipes is the fluid that runs through your whole system. It usually is a combination. It should be a combination of water and antifreeze so they don't freeze. So when you're looking for the nozzle, you're looking in the closest part to the boiler part, but not inside the boiler. Right? The next thing is that there's something called a CAD eye. Now, I think there's a couple of different types, but basically, usually they're called a CAD eye. And why it's called a CAD eye is that CAD stands for cadmium. And that is like, it's something that's going to detect whether you have a flame. So for instance, let's say the flame goes out, but it's still spraying diesel. It could spray diesel indefinitely unless the system knows that there's no flame. That CAD eye detects that. Cadmium is an element, and it happens to react to light, and that's how it's used. Now, there's a couple of different ones, but the spot for them is basically the same. The spot has to see the flame, which means it has to be right behind the nozzle. And what can happen is that cat eye can get covered with grime or soot or even drops of diesel or oil, and because it has a dye on it, it can cloud up the vision of that eye, and it has to be cleaned. So you have the nozzle that really should be replaced. You have the eye, which can be replaced, but it's usually going to be clean. Now, how do you know if it needs to be replaced? I guess we should point this out. The way the system works is that it's always checking to see if there's a flame, so it can immediately turn that sprayer off, right? Or it can immediately turn the pump off. So if you turn on the oil burner and it runs for a few seconds and then turns off, that's a good sign that the cat eye needs to be replaced. Most of the time, that's not how it is. Okay, most of the time it's just a little cloudy or something. It just needs to be cleaned a little bit, and it'll run for a little while, and then it'll get stopped up, and you got to come in there with a rag. So those are the first two things. The next thing is the filter. Now, usually you're gonna have your oil tank, and it's going to have a hose coming out the bottom. Hopefully there's a turn-off valve there, a shut-off valve, and it's going to follow along, and somewhere between, in that hose, between the tank and your oil burner, you are going to see a metal container, and inside that metal container is the filter. You can open that thing up, right? Make sure you shut off that turn-off valve, whether it's a dial turn or a lever. Turn that off. You can open up the container and you can look at that filter. And if the filter is black, then there's a real good chance that the filter is clogging up the entire system, and you need to change it. And there's a couple different types out there. Usually on the container, on the side of the container, it's going to have some sort of F number, F with a number. And that's going to tell you the type of filter it is. Or you could change the entire thing if you wanted to convert to another filter. There's a couple different ones. The one that I think is the most common is like this general one. I'll show you a picture on the screen. That's the most common one. They work. It's like a paper filter, and you can absolutely change the one that you have over to it as long as the fittings match up. If they're 3/8, usually they're 3/8. But the other one could be 1/2 inch, but usually it's 3/8. That can get jammed up. Always good to change that. And the last thing is, well, there's actually two things, but let's go with the one that I'm going to say is the last one, is what's called the strainer. Now, this one I knew nothing about. I knew zero about this. I knew a little bit about this cat eye one. I knew about the nozzle, which I think everybody knows, and I think everybody kind of knows about the filter. But I didn't know about the strainer. I went to the parts store to get myself a new filter, and I was like, yeah, you know, it turned off, and you know, I'm just trying to figure out what it is. He goes, did you check the strainer? I said, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, it's usually right near the pump on the side, and you know, you can take and get clogged up, and you can clean it. You don't have to replace it. I was like, all right, I'm going to look into it. And it was very easy to find. The entire unit, besides the part of the boiler with all the pipes running through it on the inside, that thing is only really like this big. It's a very, very small unit, at least on mine. They're very compact, and they're easy to service. They are easy to service. I found out where the strainer was, and I opened it up, and wouldn't you know it, it was completely and totally jammed up with just dirt and soot, and I just cleaned it out and closed it up, and that was my issue. And I also did need to clean the cat eye a little bit. I had to dry up some there was oil on it. There was diesel fuel on like a drop on it, and I think that was screwing it up too. But the smoking gun was this strainer, and those are the big ones. Now, there is one more thing that can happen. As your oil burner runs, now this shouldn't be the case. If it's running correctly, it shouldn't happen every single year. If it happens, if you have to do this every single year, there's a problem with your oil burner. But what can happen is that soot can build up on the inside of the boiler, that big box, not the unit that I'm talking about with the pump and the strainer and the nozzle, not that. The actual box with all the pipes running through it. Over time, soot can build up inside of that thing. In fact, when we first bought the house, we came in and we started to live here full time. The oil burner didn't work at all, and I called the guy, and he came, and I came down there, and I'm interested. I'm wondering what's wrong. I said, "What's wrong?" And he had the thing open, and soot was totally, but you couldn't see inside of it. And he's saying, "Oh, that's what's going on." And I was like, oh, Jesus. And I thought, ever since then, we're talking over 6 years ago, ever since then, I thought, because I've never opened this thing up, that it was always like that every single year. But the more research I did, I realized is that it better not be every single year. And when I opened mine up, it was completely and totally clean. Totally clean. Not a single drop of soot. And I haven't gotten it cleaned by this guy in a while, over a year. So what can happen is that it can be filled with soot, and the flame doesn't heat up the pipes. And then it's sensing that. It's like, okay, the pipes aren't getting heated up, which means it's blocked, which means it needs to be cleaned out. So if you open that thing up, the panel, and you see just tons of soot there, that's all got to be vacuumed out. It needs to be completely and totally clean. And you might say, let me get you might get yourself a shop vac, right? And the end of it might be this big. It's not going to work. This thing's too big. Those pipes are very close to each other, right? So you either have to get in there with some sort of like long piece of metal and scrape all that stuff out and have it fall down and vacuum it underneath, or you need a very small shop vac with a maybe a 1-inch pipe instead of this one, which is a 2-inch, right? That'll allow you to get in between the pipes with the extension and suck everything out of there. So that's the 5 things. The 4 things, though, unless your actual unit is not running correctly, you really only have to worry about those first 4 things that I mentioned. Now, I'm not suggesting you try and do this. If there's an emergency and you want to try, okay, you're armed with some information right now. But I would say that if you have the money and you are paying somebody to come over and keep that maintenance going every single year, you are now armed with information to ask questions. Hey, what happened this time? Right? And you can listen. He might say, "Oh, your nozzle was bad," or the eye needed to be cleaned, or he might say something that isn't what I just talked about, and you ask a question like, "What is that?" Right? These things are very simple. Next thing is, so if he's not telling you the truth, you might be able to find that out. Also, if the person says, this thing's dead, you got to replace this thing, it's no good. Well, then you say, all right, give me a few days, I'm going to think on it. And then you have the information that I just told you about. You go in there and you look at it. You take a look at the strainer. You see what's going on. If everything seems clean and it's not working, then this person might be right. You might want to get a second opinion. You now have information. But if the thing's broken, then really, is it that bad that you go in there? Make sure you definitely disconnect the electrodes. Usually, there's a plug somewhere along it where you can just unplug it. It's very, very simple, and you just unplug it. Now, getting them started again after you unplug it can be a little confusing. It depends what unit you have. Mine, after I replugged it, I couldn't just hit the test button. I couldn't do that. I actually had to go to a thermostat, make the thermostat click on, then I could hit the button. So don't, just be careful with that. You can get confused. It's like, oh, I screwed it up, it won't start. Most likely you didn't screw it up. Usually you're going to hear it click on. Now, what can happen, and I did this to myself too, is I forgot to turn the diesel fuel back on, right? I shut it off and it ran everything out and turned off. I'm like, oh man, here we go. I forgot that and I also didn't bleed it. This is another thing. It's like brakes. If there's air bubbles in the system, it's going to shut off. So there's usually a bleeder, and that bleeder on mine is right near that strainer. Look for that. It's going to be, I don't know, a 12 millimeter nut, and you'll just take it and it'll bleed out. It looks just like a caliper bleeder. It looks exactly like that. Now, what can happen too is that you could turn it and nothing could come out. That can happen. And maybe you got to hit that test button, and then it's going to run the pump, pull the oil out, and then you turn it, right? And now once that whole system is primed and it's off, then you could crack it open again and it'll start running out slow. It's going to shoot out if you press the button and have that thing open. So the bleeding but if yours is running all the time and all of a sudden it shuts off, it has nothing to do with that bleeder. The only time you would use that bleeder is if you're changing a whole bunch of stuff. You're changing the filter, right? You shut off the thing. Usually the filter too, the case has a bleeder on it. So that's something to look at. But you might have to bleed the system. I pretty much bleed the system every single time, just so I know that it's going to be good. So that's the information that I have on the things that you need to check. The last thing I want to give you is information on the nozzle, because it is confusing. Let me zoom you in over to here. I got a nozzle and let's talk about it. All right, inside this little plastic case is a replacement nozzle. Now, I didn't know anything about these before I went on this oil burner journey here. And I figured to myself, okay, I took a nozzle off. I was able to take it out, and I said, okay, there's probably only a few of these different things. Let me go down to a local hardware store and let's see if I can get a replacement. And I go down there and I said, hey, you got, sometimes they're called jets. I said, you got one of these oil burner nozzles? They go, yeah, right over there on the wall. I look over at the wall and there's a million of them there. And I said, wow. I'm like, he's going to have it. This is perfect. I go over there and I realize there's a million because there's a million different kinds. There's a million different combinations. So let's look at this right here. You see that? It has two different numbers and a letter. Okay? On the top, you see 0.75. And then you see below this 60, and then a degree symbol, and then this is a B. Now, the 0.75 is GPH, which stands for gallons per hour. So that is 0.75 gallons per hour. This is the degree, the angle at which it shoots out the diesel fuel. And the letter is the spread, or it's the, I think they call it a spread. And from what I know, there's only two different ones. There's A and there's B. A is represented by a red cap, and B is represented by a blue cap. All right, this is not the wire. We're talking about nozzles here. But yeah, the blue cap is B, and B is a solid spread, meaning when it shoots out of the nozzle, it's a solid stream, but the A is a hollow stream. That's the difference. Now, if you go and you need to exchange this, and they don't have the exact one that you need, you can mess with this number a little bit. In fact, if you look at your oil burner, there's probably going to be a sticker that says what the range is that you can use. Now, mine happened to have some crazy range of 0.75 to 1.5. But when I opened up the unit, the nozzle that was in there, it says it here, it's very difficult to see, but it'll say, this says 0.85. And it does say 60 degrees, and it says B. Now, if you see how this looks very clean. This is a screen right here, and this actually can be taken off. This screen is actually dirty. This is dirty. And when you look at a new one and you compare it, you're going to see. So a clean one is very, very nice. Do I have a clean one? I might have a clean one. There we go. Here's a clean one right there. I don't want to take it out and mess it up, but you can see the difference between this one and that one. This is after, I would say, just a year's worth of use. Now, as I was saying before, you can mess with this number, this 0.75. You cannot mess with this degree and this letter. You must match that. But this one has some flex. It does. I mean, it definitely has, especially considering mine says 0.75 to 1.5. Here's what I would suggest, though. Do not use 0.75 and don't use 1.5. Pick a number that's above 0.75. I would say the least you can go with not being on the outer edges. So this being 0.85, that was what's in there. That's what I replaced it with. That's what I'm sticking with, the 0.85. So it's a complicated thing, but this is definitely good to know. This is the screen, and right here there's a tiny pinhole right here. You can barely see it. That's what it shoots out of. It's crazy, but that can get jammed up so easily. Think about a piece of sand. If it was in here, if it somehow got past this screen, it would jam this thing up immediately. That can happen. All right. Let's do some closing and I'll let you go. Okay, it's kind of funny that I didn't realize how many combinations there were. But that's something to know. I'm going to link in the description the one that I got. I ordered a bunch from Amazon. They're cheap. It's way better to have them on hand and replace them than to clean them and, take that screen off like I was saying you can do. Without a doubt, it's better to replace them. Obviously, in a pinch, if you're watching this and you really need to get it going, you can clean them. But I would say order some, have them on hand, have two. That's probably best. And I would definitely order a filter and order a screen. In reality, all that stuff, if you had, let's say, two nozzles, a strainer. I called it a screen, but a strainer and a filter. If you have all, that's less than $50 to have that on hand. And I'm going to probably be doing that every season, before every season. So September, I'll probably do everything and make sure it's working really good. So that's it. I hope this helped you out. I hope it gave you some confidence maybe to tackle this on your own. If you feel confident, go for it. If not, at least you have some knowledge when you call the oil burner guy. All right, everyone. Catch you in the next one. See you.